All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are live. I am the Crypto Crow. Here it is about 4:32 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Officially, we did start this on time, but YouTube likes to take a minute. I'm here live with my guest, Mathew Spoke, CEO and Grand Poobah of all things AION. Mathew, thank you for joining me. I know that we started off weird on Twitter, but we're here, and there's no hard feelings. And I like your hat, and I expect to see one in my mailbox.
I could probably make that happen. That seems like a small ask.
Yeah, I'm a cheap whore, man. Just send me a hat, and we're good, and everything's gonna be gravy. So, look, this all kind of started because obviously, I started off as an early investor in AION. I built a 6 GPU mining rig where I've spent like the last, I don't know how long, 6 months, a year, basically a big chunk of the bear market, just mining it up, knowing like I could have just spent the money and bought more, the price has definitely seemed to pare down, but like everything else has. The only question has been, when does it start to come back up? Now, I believe in the project still, and I've been presented with all kinds of FUD and craziness, but look, brother, I've been reading and seeing FUD about my ultimate favorite project, Cardano, now for years. I've seen FUD about Bitcoin. I've seen FUD about Ethereum. I've witnessed it all. I've seen it all, and I take it all with a grain of salt. People like to spread bad news, misinformation, theories, gossip, you name it, for a variety of different reasons. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm very well aware of that. I was actually pulled into this Telegram group with a lot of people that you would think you beat up all their kids. Like I'm like reading a lot of this stuff, and everybody's very opinionated and very just full of gumption about why they hate you. And then you go to another chat and everybody thinks you're like king of the world. It just seems like a relative thing. So the ultimate goal, I think, for this interview is to try and somehow establish a glue that could potentially bind both sides of the fence into a more progressive community moving forward. And so I have a lot of questions on Twitter. And you've already told me flat out, look, man, I went through, I've seen them all. There isn't anything on that Twitter that I am worried about, that I won't talk about. I'm an open book. I'll answer anything you got, whatever you throw at me, which I appreciate. Because obviously transparency is a really big thing when you're talking about a blockchain project, ultimately funded by a large community of people. And so, I respect that. I think transparency is like one of the number one things that look, and I know I'm rambling for a minute here, but I just kind of want to lay the foundation for all of you guys watching and Matt, like what to expect and what my purpose is here. As an investor, somebody who has been very into the project for quite some time, a lot of the questions and the answers are all going to educate me as well. So I'm going to be asking you things that I think are interesting and so forth. So, first of all, how the hell are you?
I'm doing well. It's been a weird year for, I think, most people. I mean, I personally, before we get into AION, I got married this year. I had a baby this year. So working from home turned out to be, a silver lining in a lot of ways, just because I'm sitting in my basement with my desk, but I'm never more than a couple minutes away from being able to pick up my kid and hang out for a second. So it's been sort of nice on the home front.
Well, congratulations on all of that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's been a wild year. We timed everything very coincidentally and very lucky. I got married right before the pandemic started, so any later we would have to cancel our wedding. So
is this your first child?
It's my first child. Yeah,
okay, so you're a girl or boy?
A boy.
Oh, okay. You got lucky there. You might actually keep your balls for a while. As soon as you start having girls, man, everything just changes. Like you start crying about the dumbest shit and everything just gets weird. And, you have a little boy, you can just throw him out in somewhere with a machete and he'll somehow figure out a way to make a fort and have fun and terrorize the neighborhood. But you have girls, man, it's just, I have 3 daughters. So it's Yeah, I guess you lucked out on your first one.
I'll take your word for it. I haven't had any daughters to experience that with. But.
Yeah, you kind of somehow you managed to get paid back for everything you ever did when you were young. Let's just put it that way. So yeah, congratulations on that. Has anybody ever told you you look like an educated Steve-O?
I have not heard the educated part of that, but I've heard the Steve-O part of that a few times. Yeah,
well, because you don't look strung out on drugs, but you look like Steve-O, so I'm going to assume you went to college.
Well, you'll have to take my word for it that I also have a big tattoo of my face on my back, just like inspired by Steve-O. So.
Right. Yeah, man, it's funny because I watched something recently with him in it. I'm like, wow, he's getting old. Like, the drugs are not doing him any favors at this age. So anyway, okay. So I'm seeing a lot of different things, and I saw somebody posted a bit of a chart. They're kind of showing the 3 different, I guess you can call them branches of the overall AION project. Now, correct me when I'm wrong, and I'm sure I will be in some of the stuff that I comment. But originally we have AION, and then we have the Open Application Network, and now we have Moves.
Yeah.
What is the overall relationship between the 3? Are they all ultimately funded from the original crowdfunding treasure trove that was AION, and that's branching off into some of these other use cases? So, and like, explain that kind of trifecta, if you will.
Yeah, no, that's and actually, even I think one of your earlier comments, just to give some context, because I think a lot of people, you came into the project really, really early on, right? I think a lot of people came into the project at different stages in our history. And I think one challenge, frankly, that I've been trying to think about how to solve is that depending on when you came into the project, you came into the project with an interpretation of our strategy based on what we were focusing on at that time. And, I think people who have followed us know that we have made pivots, we have sort of adjusted, we've learned, and we've changed our strategy. And, depending on your last update, which might be my last update, might be October 2017. All of a sudden, you reopen the AION book today and you're completely confused, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's completely different than it was 3 years ago. We've got a different go-to-market strategy. We've got different priorities. And I think a lot of that we're going to address today. Some of that is this AION Open Application Network and Moves sort of trifecta, as you put it. But I think just for one, that's probably worth calling out. Like a lot of people who feel lost maybe is just, we need to do a better job at communicating with them as to what is our current strategy and why has it changed, right? Mm-hmm. So if I do a quick recap as to what AION was, what it is today. So what AION was 2017, we had been building a blockchain company for about 1.5 years at that point. We had built up some pretty solid engineering sort of muscle in protocol development. And we had a thesis around how could we build a public protocol that was different than Ethereum, but sort of fit within the same category, I would say, a smart contract platform, but with the added characteristic that it would have a different design on its virtual machine, it would have a different approach to consensus and block production, and it would have this concept of interoperability and multi-chain sort of like connectivity, right? All of these, I'd say, were technical designs that we were excited about, the AION virtual machine, the Unity consensus, and bridging. Every one of these, though, was a technical hypothesis that we hadn't built yet, nor had we ever tested sort of demand for it, right? So building out bridging to just find out that there was nobody waiting for bridging yet, because like the overall usage of public blockchain networks hadn't hit that tipping point where you needed sort of like a multi-blockchain universe. It was like people were still just consuming a single blockchain, for the most part, Ethereum and Bitcoin, right? And all these other blockchains were sort of sitting on, frankly, 1% capacity of their actual transaction throughput, if that, right? So we built a lot of this technology just to realize that we were playing this engineering game of could we keep up with the technical chops of other teams without stopping and questioning, do we have a thesis around like who's going to use this and for what, right? Like what businesses or problems are going to be solved on top of our blockchain stack that are uniquely, solvable because of this technology. And rather than just playing the same game everybody else was playing, frankly, you might remember we raised $23 million back in 2017. $23 million felt like a lot lot
it's worth like $3 million now, right?
Yeah. Well, until you realize that like a lot of our competitors raised hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, right? So if you try to play the same game as EOS or Tezos or any of who had massive treasuries and could sort of pay people to enter into their ecosystem, build on their protocols, and try to like just fuel money into this to sort of get the flywheels moving, we couldn't win at that game. We would run out of money and go bankrupt long before we'd actually see any real traction.
Did you exit out of Ethereum at the time, or did you hold the Ethereum through the market? Like what capital were you actually working with? Because like anybody that actually held the Ethereum obviously just watched their capital reserves plummet with the rest of the market. But those that cashed out and they said, okay, well, we got our Ethereum, we're going to convert that to USD. Well, then you would have had $23 million. You could have been in a better position than most. What approach did you guys take to that?
So we got lucky from a timing perspective. We were pretty systematic in like selling, but without having the exact numbers in front of me, October 2017 was before the Ether bull market, was before the Bitcoin bull market, right? So we raised Bitcoin around $5,000. We raised Ether around $300, right? So then we saw the price of Bitcoin go to 20,000. Then we saw the price of Ether go to 1,200. And so we had been sort of selling along the way. We had Bitcoin, we had Ether in our treasury, we had some US dollars. And over the course of several years, some of it we got lucky. We got some sells going from 300 to 1,200 on Ether, from 5,000 to 20,000 on Bitcoin. But some of it we also sold on the way back down, right? So overall, though, our $23 million treasury probably turned into something like 55 or 60 million bucks, just based on like spreading out those sales. If not, we would have run out of money a long time ago, right? Like we haven't gone back to the market to capitalize ourselves. And so to be operating 4 years later or 3.5 years later on, the same sum of money that we originally started with, and frankly, still having like a third of the money that we started with, is not because we've only spent 14 million bucks. It's because the total sum grew over time, and we were fortunate to be part of that. But I also think we were pretty conservative and managed in our financials. We weren't overspending in areas that sometimes people were getting pissed at us because they thought we should be spending more on marketing or more on promotion or whatever. But honestly, I thought that a lot of those efforts were just like screaming into a noisy room. You were just adding, you could spend millions of dollars on marketing just to be the 100th project marketing in the exact same way. And that, in my perspective, would have been wasted millions of dollars, right? Because it wasn't differentiating you. And we saw this happen across the board. We saw tons of projects. I mean, I don't know if you remember projects like Quantum out of China that at one point in time was a top 10 project, and, thought that the path to success was, maybe a year later, they would have been the next Tron. But at the time, they were just spending until they ran out of money and sort of like evaporated, right? And we had less money than a Quantum, and I didn't want to fall like victim to the same trap. And, I think there was a lot of companies and projects at the time that were just copying each other's strategies and wondering why they weren't standing out. Mm-hmm. And I can't say that we found the right strategy. We're still looking for the right strategy, but it just felt to me like doing the same thing everyone else was doing wasn't going to get us to a winning outcome. It was just going to get us to, at best, an average outcome. And so we've been trying for the last couple of years to, pave our own path and find our own unique differentiator and how we go to market and what our value proposition is. And the transition from AION to the OAN to now focusing on moves has been parts of that evolution, right? Just figuring out new ways to talk about our strategy and new ways to think about what problems we're solving.
So given that, what is the value proposition right now? Like, obviously you've branched off into a few different avenues. What exact problems is this? Well, I guess we could just call it the AION network overall instead of the trifecta. I guess that'll sound a little better. But the overall network, you've got Moves Financial, and I'm looking at this chart, freelance and gig worker customer, low interest loan products, no credit checks or reporting, bank integration with Plaid, paid by Visa, automated approval, deposits and payments, self-sovereign financial reputation. So this is basically the newest of the overall network. And then prior to that, you had the open application network, which is more developmental focused to empower developers to create applications, right? Is that
well, I think maybe the way I'd frame it is for, I'd say, most blockchain protocols, Ethereum's maybe the best example because it's been live in market for a long time. I'd consider them sort of horizontal development platforms, meaning their strategy is to get lots and lots of products built on top of them, right? So they're like a development toolkit. You can go onto the Ethereum network, you can build a product, you can launch an app, you can write your own smart contracts. And the success of Ethereum is like the sheer number of users that flock into its ecosystem and build products on top of its protocol, right? So that horizontal strategy, I think a lot of us have tried. That's EOS's strategy, it's Tron's strategy, it's Ethereum's strategy. And Ethereum, I wouldn't even say it's a strategy. I think it's just like everybody's like mimicking them, right? Like for them, it's, I think, legitimately just an organic community that gives it that characteristic. What we decided to do with moves and right before that with the OAN was go vertical. And what I mean by vertical was like, don't try to be the protocol that is all things to all people. Build a protocol that uniquely solves like a significant market problem in a vertical. And, this was inspired a little bit. There's a company that I spent a lot of time sort of digging into called Figure.com, that not a lot of people would be familiar with because their token is not publicly traded. But Figure is a blockchain company, but it's a product. It's a product that allows for American citizens to refinance their homes. And they've already done over $1 billion of financing on the Figure product. So you go to Figure.com, you can punch in your information about your house, and you can effectively take out a home equity line of credit on your home. And they've built a significant portion of this product on a blockchain, such that every time they originate a credit instrument, it gets issued on their network. It sort of gets its own characteristic, and they can sort of like sell it off to other participants in their network. And it's all powered by their own cryptocurrency. That strategy, this like vertical, their blockchain protocol has the sole purpose of powering Figure the product. And if Figure the product is a big enough market opportunity, then the protocol is sort of the fuel of that market, right? So for us, we went out looking for, hey, what's the market that we're particularly excited about? Because our strategy before was like, hey, let's let other people build products. But if we could never find a great product company to build on top of AION, AION's success was tied to a bunch of mediocre product companies. We had a whole bunch of mediocre product companies that were coming to build in our ecosystem. And we said, well, we can't influence adoption. We can just sort of hope that they influence adoption, right? If they go get millions of users, we benefit. So what we decided to switch in the tail end of last year was, let's put ourselves in the driver's seat. Let's build a product that actually acquires customers, that actually drives consumer demand into a product that, under the hood drives consumer demand into our asset, into the underlying protocol. So Moves, I'd say the way to think about it is a consumer-facing product sitting on top of our protocol. Our protocol, we had rebranded to the Open Application Network. The asset is still called AION. So I would say AION and the OAN are sort of like Cardano and ADA. Like the name of the asset is different than the name of the protocol. Stellar and Lumens, right? So we had the protocol is called the Open Application Network. The asset was called AION. The product that we're building is called Moves.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to get into some of these Twitter questions and
Great.
See what we can uncover here, see what we can better understand. Well, that question's so stupid. All right, let's see. I'm not going to ask dumb questions. Some of them are just meant to like smack you, and I'm like, I'm not asking these questions. They're not doing anything for anybody. I want to learn today. I guess this is fair. How disappointed are you in the market performance of the AION token? In hindsight, have we missed massive opportunities to be a top 25 coin? Do you think you can get it back in the top 50, and how?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. And I think, the honest answer is, of course. If anybody is incentivized to the success of AION, it's me. So of course I'm disappointed. But I don't think that the direct relationship that people think exists between the actions we take and the price of the coin are always that black and white. Like, I think often people think, oh, if you had just done one more thing, the price would have performed better. I think probably, I'll be fair to take some responsibility to this, but I would say probably more than 50% of the movement of our coin was macro crypto economics that were outside of our direct influence. If I look at people who point back to January of 2018 as to why can't you be a $12 coin again? In my mind, January of 2018 was this anomaly in time that had nothing to do with the substance in any project, us included, right? It was just everybody went up for this like wild ride. I remember there was an analyst report written by Palm Beach Confidential back in January of 2018, Tika, who said, hey, I'm buying AION and I'm buying it up to $10. We were trading at $1.50 the day that report came out. On the back of that report, within a week, we were trading at $11.50. I can't say that any of that price appreciation had merit or validity, right? I don't blame the fact that the market got excited. The market was getting excited about everything. But to try to measure us today on that price at that time, I think is not an apples to apples comparison, right? Like what we're trying to build today is substance in the underlying economics of AION. I think we're far off from where we'd like to be. Of course, I'd like to be back in the top 50 of cryptocurrencies. I can talk a little bit about what we're doing to influence sort of the economic fundamentals of AION. So yes, I'm disappointed. I think one metric that I follow is how we rank relative to our peers. I think one of the big frustrations of being a crypto entrepreneur is watching your project slip when you're making every effort, while you watch other projects rise that seemingly are making no effort, right? And so like that frustration is very real for me. I can't say that means that we've always made the right decisions. We've decided when to invest in things, when not to invest in things, how to spend money, how not to spend money. But yes, I'm frustrated.
So, and maybe this helps, maybe it means nothing because I'm just some dude on the internet, right? But if I were to think that there were any one primary issue, and this isn't just with AION, this is with a lot of projects out there who spend more time focusing on what they're building, what they're developing, and less time so much worried about, not that you're not worried, but there's definitely, from what I've seen, there's definitely a major disconnect with the community. And I think ultimately that community is what drives the overall interest on a much grander scale to attract the attention of the people like Atika and the other guys who are basically, charging a couple grand a year for a pump and dump newsletter, right? Like, in my opinion. And it's like, you're absolutely right. And I agree with you in the sense that, at the peak of the market, it was nonsensical. I mean, it was basically a FOMO into a completely different realm that the vast majority of people did not understand or know much about, even myself included. I was still learning so much. I was still new to the space. I got in it November of 2017, and it's been nothing but a learning process for me ever since. And I threw a lot of money and stuff. Ethereum I was mining up. I'd throw it here, throw it there, and it was just like, I don't know exactly what's happening, but I love it and I want to be a part of it, and I'm going to learn everything I can as I go. And a lot of the sentiment was established from not only potential use case, but a lot of it was driven by community sentiment. And when that community sentiment, it's almost like there's an umbilical cord between the community and the team. And when that umbilical cord is cut for any reason or thinned out, then what happens? It's like, to give you an example, I watched a TikTok video recently. It was a prank on a spouse. And it was basically it was a guy who would just sit there, he'd turn on the camera and he would just tell his wife, honey, I fucked up. And he's not allowed to say another word. And to see what kind of crazy responses develop over time as this person is trying to figure out what that means, right? And it turns into like questions. And those go unanswered, and that turns into frustration, goes into fear. Then it goes into, I've been betrayed. I think you're screwing me. You know what I'm saying? You know where this is going? So it's with that disconnect in communication, all hell breaks loose. So at that point, everybody's left to just assume the worst, believe in that, and that becomes your sentiment. And that's what ultimately spreads like wildfire, because a few upset people can turn something, fantastic into nothing if the rest don't have the motivation to speak up. And that's just my own personal thought, like from a marketing perspective, and what I've seen from so many projects who, have rose very quickly in the bull market, at the peak of the market, and then seemingly, because there were a lot of projects out here who they just buried their noses in the sand because there weren't any voices, there weren't any ears to hear their voices. They could put out press releases, partnerships, anything they wanted to, but nobody's out there to hear them, because once the market fell, the investment capital went away, people were pulling everything out, and the rest of the world went back to their normal lives. And the development teams thought, okay, well, we've got our capital. We did what we can. Now it's time to develop and have enough going so that when the eyeballs start coming back to the space, we can light that fire again and start getting this train moving forward with some actual development, some progress, roadmap milestone completion, and things like that. And I think some of the sentiment that I'm seeing has come from the idea that AION started at A, and now it has A, B, C, D, all kinds of stuff. Like we're not sure exactly what problems AION is looking to solve at this point. And so I think that's where a lot of the confusion has been coming. And that's just that's just what I'm seeing in a lot of the questions, the Telegram communities, and that sort of thing. So I definitely think it would be like, even if there was, like a weekly kind of in the chat doing AMA. I don't know. I'm just throwing out ideas.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think, no, I don't think I've always been the best at managing sort of the community relationship with our project. I think I do try to like stay as in tuned as I can, but I think there's moments where sentiment is shifting that we could probably be more proactive about capturing like misinterpretations of what we're trying to do. I will say, and not in our defense, but I'd say in defense of people building companies in this industry, I think one of the big challenges, and I use, as a comparable, I'll use like people building companies in sort of non-crypto industries. If you were just building a tech company that had nothing to do with crypto, I've learned over the course of the last few years that there's like a massive difference that plays out to the disadvantage of the entrepreneur in crypto because, starting a business outside of crypto is, to a certain extent, it's a roll of the dice. Investors will come into a project knowing that the probability of failure when you invest in a project early on is very high. But if successful, you're betting on the fact that the returns and the outcomes are very large, right? So you're taking this like calculated risk as an investor. Generally speaking, this is sort of the venture capital market. But along the way, you don't dwell on failures because failures are part of the equation that you signed up for. Part of the equation you signed up for is I'm going to build a portfolio of 100 companies, knowing that only 5 of them are going to be successful, 10 of them are going to be mediocre, and 85 of them are going to fail. So I'm not going to blame the 85 when they fail because that's part of the equation of my fund, right? Like I invested in 100 companies knowing that to be true. And often what will happen is that the 5 that are successful have previously been failures, right? They've previously failed once or twice or 3 times before, and they come back re-energized. They come back with new lessons learned, with new skills, and they try again, right? With a revised version of their idea or on a different idea. And the venture capital market and the tech market outside of crypto celebrates that, right? You celebrate failures and learnings, and even if they're expensive learnings. I think the crypto market penalizes that. And so what you end up with is this sort of contrary alignment where you think you're aligned to your community, but actually at the earliest sign of we might be revisiting our strategy, or we might have been wrong last year when we said this and we now think this. If you don't position that the exact right way, they jump all over you, right? They jump all over you and start thinking the house is on fire and start thinking that everybody's got to run for the hills. When in like a non-crypto setting, that's a normal circumstance. Companies pivot all the time. Companies fail all the time. Companies sort of like kill one business to relaunch a year later on a completely different business. And that's normal. That's the part of like innovating and iterating, right? And I think
so. I've been self-employed since high school. So I've had a lot of different businesses that have, of all levels of success and failure. I hear every word you're saying. The contrast to that is the idea that cryptocurrency has ultimately opened up an opportunity for layman's investors, for non-accredited investors, for people who otherwise aren't invested in traditional markets and don't necessarily understand the idea behind a venture capital firm's portfolio establishment, or the idea that if you invest in 35 projects, 5 are going to far outweigh and return on investment than the losses of the rest, and so forth and so on. I understand all that, but one of the biggest things that cryptocurrency has enabled is the general person who maybe has an extra $100 and it's their last $100, the only $100 they may ever get, and they invest it into something that they, whether it's hype or FOMO or what have you. And so, and they've been given that ability, right? And especially early on, if a layman's, or if everybody jokes about plebs and this and that, but people who they want to see a return, and they've been given an opportunity to basically throw some Ethereum at a contract and hope for a large return. And at a time when everybody was basically being programmed and trained to expect that, you are coming from a more traditional, this is the reality of the world, whereas a lot of people in crypto are used to saying, I'm going to throw $100 and then I'm going to pull out 20 grand in 6 months, and if I don't, you're a scammer, right? So it's this mentality. Now, with that though comes a responsibility from project leads, developers, CEOs to say, you know what, we're going to pivot here, we're going to change this, and we're adapting to the space, and we're trying to create value. But what we're going to do to educate you on a consistent basis, here's a roadmap. This is how we're following up with this roadmap. This is how we're completing these milestones, and here's a community manager to make sure you understand all of it on a regular basis so that you don't lose your mind because you're new to this. But this is how we kind of instill that faith that we're in it to win it for the long haul, even if there are changes in that term. So I understand completely what you're saying, but I also believe that to some degree we have to wear kid gloves to those that are
I don't disagree with that. And I mean, are we doing it exactly the right way, and are we doing sufficiently, I think is up for debate. But I think we have a group of very active community managers that are pretty well tuned into what we're doing and do their best to try to keep everybody updated. There is a level of skepticism in this market where, if you choose not to believe the community manager, there's not much else I can do to convince you, right? So we have a very loyal group of community managers that are constantly sort of up to speed on our latest thinking and latest development. And even the graph that you're looking at, that's not something we put together. That's one of our community managers put together to help sort of articulate and explain what's going on in the project. So I don't disagree. I think constant education as to our thinking and as to the latest version of our strategy is important. I think one thing that was skewed back in 2017, 2018, that's, that you mentioned a little bit of, is this idea of, think of your high profile, successful tech company, Uber, Slack, whatever the case might be. It's very rare to find tech companies that have a 3-year roadmap that doesn't move or doesn't change. Sure. Because you learn things along the way, right? You get customer feedback, you validate it, you test an assumption, you either prove it or disprove it, and then you go this way, right? So, I think there was this incentive early on to say, hey, be fully transparent about what you intend to do for the next 3 years with the money that you've collected. When the reality was that
that's unrealistic, I think.
To know what you're going to do in 6 months, right? Because in 6 months you might learn something that you didn't know, right? And so it's just, we've been trying to find that balance. I don't know. I can't say that we've done it perfectly. Obviously, we have to address concerns in the community, but I think finding that balance is not as easy as it sounds.
Fair enough. So I guess if you were to go to, let's say you were doing a public sale right now. I know you're not, right? But if you were doing a public sale right now and you were trying to get somebody to understand why they would invest in the AION today, what would you tell that individual was going to be the primary use case for adoption of the AION token? What is the problem exactly that you're solving with the AION network right now? And how do you see that growing in use over the next even 6 months to a year?
Yeah, that's fair. So I'd say the gig economy is our primary focus, and the gig economy. And if I could have this thesis in 2017, I would have framed it probably as the gig economy has an economic dynamic that we think is lacking, and we think a cryptocurrency will move the needle for a lot of people in the gig economy. And what that means tangibly, and this is where Moves comes in. We're trying to figure out a way to build an economic system that supports independent workers, what we call independent workers. You might call gig workers, Uber drivers, food couriers, a diamond, anybody who earns their income through an online marketplace, right? So you can think of all the examples of these people who have a relatively hostile relationship with their source of income being Uber or being Lyft or being DoorDash. They sort of take what they're given, but often they find they're not getting given enough, or they don't have a safety net, or nobody's looking out for their best interest because they're not employed by these businesses. They're just sort of contractors left on their own to fend for themselves. So one thesis that's been really, really front and center in the way we've been building Moves is this idea of rebuilding the gig economy around the context of shared ownership where the worker who's providing value by their time and their services should be earning a representation of like increased value in the gig economy, sort of like earning equity in the gig economy, if that makes sense. So the more you work, the more you should have reflective value because of the work that you've done, not just the income you've earned, but earning some other asset, in this case, AION, that represents sort of the growing pie of the gig economy. So what we're building into our product, we think of it as a three-sided marketplace. We're focusing on the market side number one, which is the gig worker. How do we solve a problem for the gig worker and distribute AION to them in like an economically viable way? So I'll give you an example. A gig worker comes to Moves today. They want to get a line of credit. They don't have access to a line of credit anywhere else. No bank wants to service them, but they need a line of credit because it's part of a normal person's safety net. We give them a line of credit. As they pay for that line of credit, we return to them a percentage of their fees back to their account in AION. So we're taking, let's say, a percentage of revenue, and we're translating that percentage of revenue into a purchase of AION off of the secondary market. And then we're going to be returning that AION into an account held in the customer's profile, right? So the customer's going to have sort of a banking app on their mobile phone. It's going to be their Moves profile. Part of that profile, it'll look to them, because these aren't crypto people, it'll look to them like they have this balance of points accumulating. Those points are going to be AION purchased off the secondary market that are going to be given to them for doing things within the product. They're going to be given to them for referring friends, for paying off their debt early, for saving money, and like just acting generally in a financially healthy way. When they do something that we deem to be financially healthy or something that helps grow the ecosystem, we're going to take a percentage of the money that we would make off that transaction and return it to them in AION by buying AION off the secondary market effectively. The goal there is to distribute AION into the hands of these workers. The goal, if I map this out over 2 years, 5 years, I'd like to get tens of millions of AION, maybe hundreds of millions of AION out of the market into the hands of gig workers. And so for anybody else who's just sort of sitting on the sidelines speculating on AION or buying AION off the secondary markets, that's a factor that they should be considering. Is AION getting bought off the market by Moves and given to gig workers? What can gig workers do with it over time? Over time, we're going to be creating sort of a dynamic experience within the product where they can use their AION as an asset inside their profile to do things like guarantee a loan balance, guarantee a friend's loan balance, underwrite a pool of loans. So now all of a sudden I have 1,000 AION in my account. I'm an Uber driver, and I can use my 1,000 AION to vouch for Jason, who wants a loan for the first time, and I don't have any credit history on Jason. So I'll use my 1,000 AION as a guarantee against Jason's loan because, I'm putting it forward as a collateral, as a stake to Jason's loan application because he's a friend of mine and I'm trying to refer him into the project. So we're sort of building out these like financial use cases of what that asset allows for the customer to do within the product.
Okay.
That's side number one. I mean, I can stop there and see if that makes sense or kind of move on to side two and side three.
Well, that definitely does make sense. Give me a quick rundown when you say side two, side three.
So the first side of the market, I'd call it the demand side of the market. That's the gig worker. The supply side of the market, I would say, is the capital side. So we need debt because a lot of our product experience is passing debt to customers. They want a line of credit. That means we need to find debt capacity to give to our customers. Traditionally, a fintech company that will lend to you will go to like the institutional markets, the banks, et cetera. They'll raise $100 million of debt, and then they'll take that $100 million of debt on their balance sheet and they'll lend it out to their customers $100 at a time or $1,000 at a time. And they'll pay an interest rate to borrow it, and they'll earn an interest rate a little higher to lend it out, and they'll make a margin in the middle, right? So that's how a lot of these like fintech lending companies are built. What we're testing now, and we're launching next week, a product called Moves Crypto, is we're testing the idea of raising debt from the crypto markets and using that debt to translate back to dollars and give it to a gig worker. So we can give it to a gig worker at a lower interest rate effectively, because we're trying to give gig workers access to credit that is cheaper or less predatory than if they had to go rely on like a payday lender, for example. So they might go to a payday lender and pay 50 to 100% interest rate, some cases 200 to 300% interest rate. We want to lend to them at 10% or 12%, something that feels like it's reflective of where they are. Let me ask you
this, and I don't want to. It's obvious that there's been a drastic change in overall use case focus, right? Like we started here, we started this house painting company, and then we're going to pivot to now we're going to build cars. is kind of where I see. But why? So the gig economy thing, and it sounds like you're wanting to do like a Celsius network type of thing, but I'm struggling because I'm personally thinking you're ultimately looking to get into multiple industries, I guess we'll call them, where there are already, major players. So I guess what concerns me as an investor or user or hodler or whatever is that I feel like at this point with the various pivot, I guess what ultimately created the desire or the need to pivot so drastically from one industry to another and to go into the industries that are already being led by major players.
Well, I'll challenge your second point, but we can talk about that. But I'd say your analogy, I think, is a little off. I don't think you're wrong that we've completely changed our business, but I don't think the analogy is like we started a painting company, we're now building cars. I think the analogy is more we started building like a network of gas stations, now we're building cars. Like what we were building before was infrastructure. We were building a network on top of which our asset could circulate and security of the underlying applications that we're building could be guaranteed. We were building sort of like crypto infrastructure. There was no use case. The use case was crypto infrastructure for the sake of crypto infrastructure, right? And I'd say 2017, 2018, and maybe even today, 9 out of 10 protocols, there's no use case. It's just you're building another protocol, right? So the use case in theory is build something, pay gas fees, and that sort of like gets the flywheels turning. But unless you have like massive amounts of usage, there's no like one use case driving the adoption of these assets or these protocols. And so all I'm saying is if we didn't drop the underlying.
You're saying you built the protocol and now you're trying to demonstrate what's possible with it. Yes, and like create another. So if I look at Ethereum as a good example, like Ether as an asset has. We did a study. There's a group in the U.S. that we worked with last year called Prism Group. Prism is like an economics consulting firm. They're a bunch of like PhD economists that happen to focus on crypto as like their space of expertise. And we did a study with them about AION when we were about to launch our staking protocol last year. And they made it really, really simple for me when they were trying to explain like what drives price in a cryptocurrency. And they broke it down into sort of 3 functions. Said like one function is the utility of the currency, right? So you can think of the utility as like paying for gas fees on a transaction or block rewards or anything that's just like the protocol working, right? The protocol is working, there's a utility to the asset. The second one was like demand for the asset outside of the utility. So a good example of that would be people buying Ether and locking it up into MakerDAO, right? Like that's demand for the asset that has nothing to do with like the block production of Ethereum. The third curve was speculation, right? Speculation happens to more often than not follow if there's good demand and good utility, then speculation will be sort of a larger multiplier. What we were building before was like a utility function. We said, hey, you can use AION to build apps. You can use AION or you can earn AION to mine and stake. What we hadn't built was a legitimate demand function, a demand function that says, hey, in this product experience for this customer, AION is being used in an economically viable way. People are buying AION off the market. They're using it to do something. That hadn't existed other than speculation and utility. And so this like middle column is what we've been focusing on. Why we're focusing on the gig economy? I'd challenge your premise that there are leading players in this space. We are, the year that we've been spending on this indicates to me that there is almost nobody addressing this gap. And this gap is 25 to 50 million people across North America that earn a large percentage of their income in this market. We see these people as a massively underserved market. I don't disagree with you that Celsius exists and other products like that, but Celsius is not making capital available to Uber drivers. Celsius is making capital available to crypto people. So nothing against Celsius, just they're solving a different problem than what we're trying to solve. I think we have the benefit of being able to look at projects like Celsius, learn what's worked, what hasn't worked for them, but point it at a different market segment. That's where I'd see our opportunity to differentiate and stand out. Fair enough. How many other, are there any other companies that have signed on or are signing on to develop on the protocol so that you're not the sole, if we want to show use case and we want to drive adoption on this protocol, we have to build it ourselves? Are there any other companies that are joining you and creating other, applications or services on it?
There's still a few that I would say are like legacy from before we decided to make this pivot. Frankly, it just hasn't been a priority of ours. We were very, very upfront with the community about this back in 2019. We said, like, our strategy is moving from encouraging third parties to adopt our protocol, because I think what was happening is, by and large, we had a selection bias. The people willing to move protocols were the lower quality projects. The higher quality projects were picking the protocol that was best suited for their needs. They weren't the ones like jumping around for the highest grant money, right? And so there was a lot of projects that were just saying, hey, which protocol is willing to pay me to build on their protocol? More often than not, we found that the quality of those products were like subpar. And what we found is you'd get protocols that had like hundreds and hundreds of apps, all of whom had near zero users, right? And so it was just like it was a facade of adoption.
It was a press release.
It wasn't leading to. It was press releases, and we've had people pitch us on, hey, let's get into a partnership so we can announce. I was like, announce what? The partnership is not worth anything if it doesn't lead to a substantive change in the underlying demand on the asset or the functionality of the protocol for somebody. And so we started shying away from those things. In 2017, we were signing press releases because we thought that was the thing to do. And then we realized that 9 out of 10 of our press releases amounted to nothing. And so we set expectations, and not because we didn't want to, just because everybody was just signing press releases for the sake of signing press releases. So no, we're not actively working to incentivize anybody onto our protocol. We're not actively working to get any third parties to build on our protocol. We're effectively trying to tie the outcomes of Moves' business strategy to the outcomes of the demand for AION. And like, I wish there was probably a cuter way to say that without scaring people, because if you came in believing in AION and you don't believe in Moves, that puts you in a tough spot. But my like primary objective this year has been to find a market that I think is very lucrative and tie the success of that market to the demand for our asset. But now you've got two things that are sort of related to each other. If one fails and the other one succeeds, they both fail. If they both succeed, I think the outcomes are pretty significant. But there's a layer of sort of like a leap of faith there that people have to make.
What is Matt Spoke's AION address, and how much AION has he sold to date?
Well, I don't know my address off the top of my head, although I have a few. And I actually disclosed this in the AMA I did 2 weeks ago. So I mean, I'm happy to give sort of a quick recap of my AION position historically. So, and for all intents and purposes, for people who are not familiar with our circulating supply, you can think of our supply as being somewhere around 475 million AION-ish. It changes as block rewards sort of go up over time. But I was allocated at the time of our first restructuring, because for people who remember, we were a company before we were a foundation. I was a shareholder in that company. That company launched AION, and then we shut the company down and created a foundation called the AION Foundation. I was allocated just under 35 million AION at that time as my total allocation. So that would have been maybe 7% of the total supply or something. Those 35 million AION were locked in a 36-month TRS distribution. So I got equal monthly distributions for 36 months. The last one of those distributions is being released to me in November. So November of this year is 36 months from the origination of that contract. Of those 35 million AION that I was allocated, I probably have, call it 15 million AION today. Of the 20 million AION that I no longer have, a large percentage of that, I would say probably half, if not 60% of that. So I'd have to go and get real numbers here, but call it 10 to 12 million of that AION, I contributed to an ecosystem fund called Bicameral Ventures. Bicameral Ventures was a fund that was created in the AION ecosystem to go and invest in projects that wanted to build on top of AION. That fund was funded by individuals contributing AION so that they could turn around and give it to companies effectively. So 12 million of my AION went into that fund, or 10 million of my AION, or something along those lines.
What came of that? I mean, that sounds cool.
12 investments, if I remember correctly, of which half of which have probably since gone belly up and bankrupt. I wasn't managing the fund, for context. This is one of my former co-founders and a partner of his that built and launched this fund with again, sort of following the playbook of a lot of other crypto ecosystems. Hey, let's put a pool of money together and let's invest it into companies. 12 investments that came out of that fund. I think 5 or 6 of them have gone belly up. One of them was a really cool infrastructure company called Nodesmith that I was really excited about, that was doing sort of like node hosting for app developers. Nodesmith ended up shutting down, but the product they built got sold to a company called Block.com. And Block is like a big infrastructure provider in this space. And so the fact that we had invested in Nodesmith means that today Block runs AION infrastructure, which is beneficial because it's available for like wallets and things like that to be able to like plug into like nodes that are run by Block. Other products that came out of that, frankly, I was like less excited about, but I had committed that, hey, anything that comes out of the ecosystem, I'm going to be the first one to sort of like commit my own assets to. Frankly, people are waiting to hear if I made a ton of money off this project. I'm either the most loyal or the dumbest person in the ecosystem, because I'm the last person who made a lot of money off this project, because I always felt that like my obligation with the assets that I was given was to invest them back into projects through grants, through investments, most of which have materialized to not much. And the assets that I have remaining are staked and just sort of like, earning block rewards.
Well, I think a lot of from what I'm seeing and some of the more frustrated people for whatever reason it sounds like they think that you're creating the sell pressure in the market that's suppressing the AION price.
Well, what I won't disagree with them on, it's not me, but 36 months of releases every single month, right? And people know this. There was a great blog post written by one of our community members, Joseph DiPascali, who wrote a blog post about what he called the AION eightening. And it was sort of a playoff of the Bitcoin halvening, right? And the concept was that every month for the last 3 years, we had prior holders of ours that used to be shareholders in my old business. And in my old business, to give you some rough numbers, I owned about 55% of that business when we moved in. But I had investors, and those investors also got AION proportionate to their positions. And those investors did, to a large extent, sell over the course of years, because they didn't come into a crypto business. They came into a software company that pivoted into becoming a crypto business. And so, yes, there's been sell pressure every month for the last 3 years. And I think we've talked about that before. The only thing I can say to sort of appease those people, and maybe it feels like it's too little too late, is we started working aggressively about a year ago to like work on getting investors to stop that were holding some of those balances. And some did and some didn't. Some we did sort of swaps with them where we got them to give us their distributions. In exchange, we gave them AION on a commitment that they would stake it, so that they took like locked AION, put it into the staking protocol, and just helped sort of move the staking flywheel. But all that to say, next month, those monthly distributions end. So anything that might have been happening over the last 36 months no longer happens after November. There's no more distributions happening into like key people's hands after November.
So you're saying after November, everything that's left on the market is what the market is. There's nobody else that's going to be dumping an asset that they've been holding or that they've been locked up with, or
the only balance left that is not held by the market is the balance held by the foundation. And the balance held by the foundation has never been materially liquidated into the market. We have what we've had. We started off with maybe 140 million AION in the foundation. We probably have 115 million. We're about to release our Q3 report, I think, tomorrow. The AION that we've given away has been grants and or like employee incentives. Our employees historically, like every 6 months, would get like 10,000 AION bonus or 20,000 AION bonus, depending on who they were in the company and things like that. So but the foundation is about to commit to a multi-year budget that will lock up its AION. So the foundation has about 115 million AION left, but it'll be restricted to a maximum amount per year that it's allowed to spend. And we're trying to spread that out over something like 7 or 8 years. So the 115 million AION will likely turn into like a maximum balance of like 10 million AION a year or something like that. We're still figuring out the exact math. And even that is like, simple example, we have a market maker that we work with that sort of provides base level sort of liquidity into our market. We pay their fee in AION, right? So that's an expense that comes out of the foundation that gets paid in AION to this supplier or vendor of ours. And so we have expenses like that we use the AION of the foundation for. But we're going to be restricting pretty significantly how much AION the foundation is allowed to put into the market on an annual basis.
What do you think would be, so when I'm hearing this, and there's so much more to ask, but we're running out of time, but just for my own, because I've been guilty of this kind of thing, I think to some degree. You say you started basically a traditional company and you got investors in the traditional company. They didn't invest in a crypto company, but they invested in the traditional company that then pivoted into a crypto company. That launched as a whole, new thing that then that pivoted into something else, so to speak.
Yeah.
Would you say that your biggest weakness is focus? And it's because of that's creating, like, there's so much that you're trying to accomplish that you want to do, but but it's creating this kind of sentiment like, oh, we're all going down because we could be a McDonald's tomorrow. Because I get it, because look, I'm somebody who typically every 6 years I get bored in whatever industry I'm in. I want to redefine what I do and who I am as a man, right? And I'm so kind of like, I want a legacy, I want accomplishment, I want to build things, I want to do something that's gonna outlive me in my own name. You know what I mean? I still don't know what the hell that is. And so I have kind of this ADD where I'm like, I want to be constantly challenged and I want to constantly try to, climb this mountain and get to the top. And then if I think, well, you know what, this isn't high enough, or this isn't, I feel like I've already done enough and I'm not learning anything else, it's not exciting anymore, then I pivot. And I'm like, I want to do this instead because it's more exciting, I'm learning more. I mean, is that kind of how you're wired, or are there other kind of things that are playing a big role into this?
I think that's like a fair perception. I think, my counter to that would be, these are not changes that have happened over 6 months. These are changes that have happened over, like, we're coming up on 5 years since I started my original company.
I meant 6 years.
No, I'm just saying, like, all I'm saying is that these are not decisions that we've made lightly or quickly. Every one of these decisions has been like a process for us. And I'd say, instead of thinking of it as like one focus over here, one focus over here, one focus over here, I see this as like we're narrowing our focus. Because, like, if I think about AION, the AION original focus is like, let's build a blockchain protocol that is all things to all people. And then we said, okay, well, let's actually focus that blockchain protocol into solving a particular set of problems for a particular set of people. And now let's build a product that is very specifically solving a problem for one set of people. Like, I just see this as like we're narrowing in on a problem. If I went and told you tomorrow that we were pivoting from the gig economy to, whatever, pick another industry, that I would agree is probably, a pivot that is like a completely random off-focus pivot. But I just see this as like we started focusing on, a scope of 100. We narrowed into a scope of 20. We're now focusing on a scope of 5. We're like just trying to narrow in our scope to solve a problem, because I don't think any of us were well suited with the level of experience that went into crypto protocols. Frankly, there wasn't a lot of like seasoned entrepreneurs that started in this business. There was a lot of like first-time people trying to like change the world in a year with their protocol, and all realizing that it doesn't work that way. You got to start by solving a problem before you can go solve the next problem. I think we've just spent the last 3.5 years finding our problem. I don't think this is a departure, because when I think about like what got me into crypto in the first place, it was the idea that you could build economic systems that were more financially inclusive, that sort of like made interesting financial tools available to a new segment of the market. That's exactly what we're doing with Moves. It's a financial inclusion strategy towards a segment of the market that we think's been overlooked, but we're using crypto to do it in a unique way. And if that plays out to the benefit of anybody, it'll be the benefit of the AION community. But that's okay. That'd be my counter to you. I don't think it's a lack of focus. I think it's, and frankly, some of these decisions, I feel like, in hindsight, we could have made them differently. But
that's always going to be the case. So, I mean, I understand that. Yeah.
Yeah. And these are not easy decisions. I've seen my team turn over multiple times to do this, right? So,
let me tell you this real quick, just so that, so first of all, I noticed that the live chat is definitely consumed by a lot of people from the FUD channel. So I want to make that clear to anybody that's out there watching, that a lot of the comments you're seeing, it looks like the same small group of people that are just throwing a lot of crazy random stuff out there that are, and I'm not logged into all of that, so I can't just like start, like goodbye. But for those of you guys that are still watching this, just know that there are a lot of like kind of people that have their own ulterior motives going on in the chat. So that's pretty clear. The other thing is that, look, after all these years now, you're still live with me on YouTube. You haven't exit scammed. You haven't taken everything and gone off to Tahiti and said, F the world. You're still here trying. So whether this whole thing has been one long education, like, look, I get a lot of it. I think there's definitely, I would like to see more of the community involvement and kind of that, that connection with the, you know, the investors, the public, you know, not feeling like every day it's something else that what's AION up to today? You know, like I definitely think that that's playing a big role in a lot of the FUD. There's definitely no question about that. Because I do believe that, look, as investors, the investors do absolutely have, like, granted, look, if this were a traditional company and it were an IPO, this wouldn't be happening. Like, a lot of the pivots and a lot of the stuff, this is stuff that you can do right now in the crypto space because of how it's structured. But as an IPO with a, you know, a public offering of a stock option where everybody's owned equity and all of that stuff, you know, there's a legal requirement to a lot of things that happen, which crypto does not currently have. So while I get a lot of it, I also do believe that it's the luxury of having those options that are driving a lot of the people that have invested a little crazy, because they don't know, they don't understand everything that's going on or why. And while you're doing you're doing different AMAs and you're going on channels and you're explaining a lot of stuff and you're great with you know what you're talking about and the way you're presenting everything, it all sounds fantastic. But I think what a lot of people are saying, the proof is in the pudding. When does the sell pressure stop? When do we start seeing active momentum in the right direction? When do we start? Because a lot of these comments and the questions, it's like, I don't even really want to waste time asking, because to be quite frank with you, I know you'll answer them well. But as an investor myself, I want to see things moving in a better direction. I would like personally to understand, well, you know what, the AION that I first invested in was X. It's still X, but it has some satellite things that are supporting it, which in a sense it sounds like it is. But I also think that you're one man trying to conquer a variety of industries on a protocol that you initially built. And I would like to see more companies taking up that arm and doing it alongside you, instead of you feeling like it's your responsibility, it's your job to build this application or that application, and we're going to solve all these problems for the world, because you're going to peter out, you're going to burn out, and we're never going to see you again. I want to make sure that this stuff is seen through to the end and that everybody's happy in the end, because it's obvious you're an intelligent individual and you can do you're not incapable. Like, I think one of my biggest problems my entire life, everybody used to tell me, was focus. I used to be told all the time, you are the most brilliant son of a bitch I've ever seen, but you're scatterbrained, you're all over the place, you want to do too much. And I've heard this since I was a kid. And it wasn't until I really figured out, like, you know what, everybody's right. Like, I am capable of doing just about anything, but I want to do too much because I don't know who I am yet. And, you know, and I'm not saying that these are your problems. I'm expressing this because I'm saying I kind of understand what it feels like to have something capable of doing a lot, and for whatever reason, not having this influx of companies wanting to use it, and then you feeling obligated to create those use cases yourself to prove that you built something worth a shit to the rest of the world. At least that's what I'm gathering. If I were you, that's how I would be.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I mean, I think the lack of focus question is I think what's lacking in our community, or in this space in general, in terms of how people are observing crypto projects, is like, what you see when you see successful projects is you see the outcome. What you don't see necessarily is you see the multiple failures towards that outcome.
Sure.
Like, you gave the example of an IPO. By the time an investor is investing in an IPO, that
They're
company
already profitable.
Well, they've refined their strategy. That's why they're going to an IPO, right? So you're investing after they've figured out their strategy, after they've proven their market, after they've figured out their business model. You're not investing before all of that, right? So I think there's like a characteristic here that is, if you want to invest early, if you want to get that advantage of being a non-accredited investor that comes into an early stage industry, the trade-off is that part of this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Negative sentiment comes from negative sentiment, right? So if you want to stop seeing, negative sentiment, stop spreading negative sentiment, right? And I'm saying this to the people watching your channel, not to you, right? So that's the beginning of the flywheel. But also you have to observe the fact that you came in early. Companies sometimes take time to find their footing. And some companies take 6 months to find their footing. Some companies take 10 years to find their footing. And some companies just fail along the way and never find their footing.
For how long before they ever turned a dime in profit? I'm aware, brother. I'm with you.
Yeah, and I think if Amazon had focused too much on that at that moment in their history, they probably would have been optimizing to the wrong metrics, to the wrong loud voices in their secondary market, et cetera, and they would have lost sight of what their North Star is.
And
I don't doubt the fact.
If they would have sat around and they would have listened to all the FUD and let everybody come talk about how Amazon's running negative $20 million, they haven't turned a profit yet, what's going to happen with this company, why is everybody still investing? And if they would have listened to the world, and then we wouldn't have Amazon today and being one of the biggest companies on the planet. So hopefully you become the next Bezos and you tell everybody in the world who are dropping FUD and chat and on Telegram and whatever their ulterior motives are, look, man, I'm hoping you have the last laugh because I'm here for you. I'm here with you. And, I don't want this to be the only time. I want to bring you back on when you're ready to show the world, look, man, I get how this was, and I get why there's so many questions and so many concerns, but this is what we've done in the last 3 months, the last 6 months. This is what we're accomplishing. These are our new partners, because I see so much potential in what you've done. And I don't buy into a lot of the FUD and the guys that are just trying to jump in chat and be just nasty because, a lot of that stuff doesn't mean anything to me. What matters to me is seeing the growth, a roadmap that's lined out, those milestones met, shared with the public, people being educated on the progress. That's what draws people in, and that's what keeps people moving forward on side of you instead of in front of you yelling. And so,
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I've taken a lot out of this conversation, and I think you're right on a lot of your comments on how do we get better at engaging the community along the way. I think we'll renew a conviction to do that. I mean, I think one thing that I could ask is we are testing aspects of our new crypto strategy, the Moves crypto strategy, starting next week. We need people to come in and actively participate in that. And the way I see that product launching is we look at the community as being part of our team, because we need people to test and tell us what they liked and what they didn't like and what economics of that product made sense to them and what didn't. Because Moves Crypto is going to be this very fast changing dynamic product that we'll probably be doing a release on every month or 2 months with new characteristics, and a lot of it is just going to be feedback. Right, we're launching the first one with a pretty low goal, raise $50,000 and guarantee it with $50,000. And we need community members to participate in that so we can actually turn around and actually learn what worked and what didn't work so we can launch another one shortly after. So, I'd love to have a more active or I'd say productive conversation with the community, because I think a lot of times it just feels like we're trading jabs back and forth, but
absolutely
get involved, right?
And
get involved and do something.
And like I said, man, I've been a huge proponent of Cardano since the very beginning, and I've seen all the videos, everybody dropping FUD videos and talking about, oh, this is going to fail, and this is vaporware, and this is fake, and this is that. And you know what Charles used to say? Fuck them. And look where he's at now. You can only let people control your narrative so much, and if you let the FUD and what the negative sentiment that people are trying to dish out on a regular basis. I don't know if he actually said that verbatim, but we've had chats. I don't want to throw him under the bus here. But let's paraphrase that term. But it's very much a not letting people control the narrative for you. You write your narrative. So if you are saying, well, it's easier for us to just be quiet, not say as much, and not break everything down, and not actively engage the community, because if we do, we get all these people jumping through the crowds with little revolvers. Then you're dead anyway. So you have to just say, fuck them, and do what you're going to do. Make sure that the people that do care know what's happening. And ultimately, the rest of these people will be silenced. As long as you're playing your cards right and you're staying true to yourself, to the people that have supported you for the longest time, and you don't lose sight of that. And I think that's overall the message that I wanted to get across in this whole thing we're doing today, is that there are a lot of people that started, including myself, believing in you from the very beginning. Don't lose sight of that because of the people that have just dog shit to throw at you, because you have a lot more to offer, and you can very easily overcome them over the next year and a half as this bull market continues, and you have an opportunity to take what you've done since the beginning, and like you said, you've narrowed down your focus. Let's see where that goes from here. You've got my renewed respect. I'm here. I'm paying attention. I'm always available anytime you need me. For the rest of you guys out there, I'm going to call it because I know it's dinner time, and I'm sorry I didn't get through all of your FUD questions and answers, but quite frankly, I'm not overly concerned with a lot of that stuff. I want to see where things go from here, and thank you guys for joining us. Thank you, Mathew Spoke, for coming on.
Yeah, let's do this again.
Yeah, absolutely.
It'll be fun.
Absolutely, man. Don't be a stranger. For the rest of you guys out there, guys, go enjoy the rest of your evening. Crow your coins, and I'll see you again real soon.